interaction with those people are. And I don't want this to come out more like, I want us to think about this as we move on and become senior faculty. Most of the things I do now in how I interact, maybe with students or with junior colleagues, is based a lot on how I learned when I was a student. Right? I personally have a few professors I try to model my behavior after. This is what this person did. This is what I really liked. And this is how I want to continue it. In fact, one of the best things that I think one of the most important things in my doctoral student was early on I went to a conference and one of the senior professors, it was still my end of my first year, kept introducing me to everybody as his colleague. Right? And of course that was very humbling, but that actually made me feel like I belonged. And it emboldened me to take part in the conversation, to have a voice. I mean, Stella talked yesterday about thinking about what your voice is. But then as we take administrative roles, we should really think about how we interact with junior faculty. We should really think about how we interact with students. One of the things I love about Africa is that at least professors are respected. I joke that when I would teach an MBA class, the students want me to carry their bags into class, right? And halfway through class, they say, "Professor, can you go get us some coffee?" I say, "Yes." At least here in Africa, there's some respect, right? But we should also think, and around the world, right, there is some respect, but how much do we want it to interrupt the peer process? If I am sitting up here at a high table, how experiential is the learning with maybe one or two people I want to be talking with and maybe looking at their screen and we're talking about the abstract? If you cannot talk to me casually and informally, can we really exchange ideas as peers? So let us sometimes also think about how these structures actually inhibit the process. When we create such separation between us and maybe the people slightly below us and even the people distant below us. So if you are even a professor, between you and the student, let's even take away everybody in between. If they are really going to learn, they have to be your peer. If they are not your peer, then this experiential learning is not taking place. And you're cheating the process. Right? So as we move on, I think I wanted to take a few minutes to talk about that. As we move on, we should really think about that. The second aspect of peer I wanted to talk about, and for some reason, coincidentally, the registrars were here and they talked about internationalization. What is our voice talking to the rest of the world? Do we see ourselves as inferior scholars? I mean, there was a whole talk yesterday about us trying to publish in northern journals, right? What about developing our own? And not because she's here, but I'm glad she's here. Professor Stella is one of those people who did a lot earlier on with AFAM and African Journal of Management. How do we have our own voice such that it talks to the rest of the world? As peers, not as inferiors, not as looking for handouts, not as borrowing theories, but saying we are peers in this conversation. We have to be emboldened to do that, right? And I was joking, and I was talking to a few people, and thanks to no small part to the things they have done the past 5-6 years, like with the African Journal of Management and with AFAM, we have a situation where literally we have a lot of scholars in the US who want to come to Lagos. We did not put out any call, we did not put out any invitations, and in my email, if anybody thinks I'm joking, I'll show you that, like, could you let us know if we can come and participate? Please, we heard so much great things, and the people who have come have said, how smart, and this is not, I'm African, and I know I'm not kissing up to you, but most people who interact know how smart Africans are. There's no question. The rest of the world, those who are open-minded are just finding out now. And they all want to, so I'm saying, well, we have more people who want to come than we have even applicants from Africa. Who want to, oh, anything I can do, just let me be part of this. I've heard so many great stories. This is where we're not asking for handouts. We didn't ask anybody. We didn't invite. They are volunteers. This is where, and I'm just benefiting from this. Professor Stella, they laid the groundwork to say we can have a conversation. We can build our own voice. We can impact as peers. And when you do that, people reciprocate. Is everybody going to reciprocate the same way? No. Right? And this also came up yesterday. So yes, there is bias in the field. Usually the bias, we will probably get the short end of the bias. There is no question about that. What is more important is what are you doing about it? Are you spending your time trying to fight the bias? That is the person, I'll tell you my personal philosophy, and everybody has their own view. That is the person with the bias's problem. My job is to make their life difficult. If I am writing a paper that is going to a journal where there are bias, let the paper be so good, they spend sleepless nights thinking about how to reject it. That is the way about it, right? But the more you do that, the more converts you get. But you also have to ask, and this is where becoming part of the conversation plays in. It is, and I'm going to use the word game in quotes. It's a game, right? It's a system that gets played a certain way. And we know the rules. We can complain about it, or we can also work with the rules and use it in our favor. So what are some of the things we can do to do that? And one of the most important is actually becoming an active peer in the conversation. And that's what I'm really going to talk a bit about today. And by the way, there's no really formal Q&A time per se. Stop me as we're going if there's anything, any question or anything we can talk about. So please just ask questions as we go. Right. If you become part of the process, you can change the process. Or even more importantly, I joke about it, but even more importantly, you know what? It's biased, so I get it and I make it biased in my favor. There is no question, you know, the Chinese are doing it, right? Last year, my institution, or a couple of years ago, my institution was hiring. One of my good friends was the chair of the search committee, and lo and behold, all the 3 applicants we hired were Chinese. Now, I'm not begrudging them. I'm learning. I want to make sure that 15 years from now, I'm doing the same. Because I know I have smart people, smart colleagues, smart people in the continent that, well, if they get into the game, they'll learn. And if we go back, we can give some names. I know Stella would remember in management when Chinese entered and they were doing how they work with each other and the people who build the support network. Now you go to most major universities, they are the gatekeepers in the US, in our field. Most journals. That's not begrudging, that is learning. I say, I learned from that. If we want to do it, let us do it. So then, we're not from the outside complaining, we literally take over the system. Do we have the capacity to do that? Definitely. Right? So let us look at how we can start thinking about doing that. And part of that is in the peer review process. I'm going to, yes.
The issue of peers, I think, in Africa is very different from the West, because in Africa here, even the professors themselves create blocks around and about them. For example, when you go to the University of Nairobi, for example, even there is a senior common room where only the professors can drink and beg. Then there is another dining area for the rest of the people and students. But now, my experience is different. When you get to the West, everyone, whether you are senior or you are not senior, you even take it from the same place and you carry your own stuff like this going back to your working area. That is at least my experience at the University of Wisconsin. But now, when we attend such conferences, actually, that distance is not there because I can interact directly with you. I sit on the same table with you. I travel on the same plane with Stella, and we talk at very informal levels and exchange things and laugh. So, when I have a problem in terms of academic things, I'm so free to reach out to you, to reach out to her, to reach out to other senior people that interact with me informally.
Yes.
But really, the African universities have not had that voice. In fact, the person who should hear are the administrators from the African universities.
I agree with you, but here's the problem. By the way, who here is in an African university? Of course, most of us. So there's nothing I can do about the people who are not here and the old administrators. What I care about is you who are going to be the new administrators in a few years. Who's going, right? The question is, can we go back and change the system from the past? No. But can we build a new one as we go forward? So you start thinking about what will your interaction be with your students? Are you going to create an open atmosphere? Are you going to open, I mean, think about most of the best research ideas I have is either sitting at the bar or at the coffee thing with students or with colleagues, and we're talking casually, say, this sounds interesting, and you start shooting ideas. If you're sitting very formally in a formal table, that is probably the worst space for creativity. Right? But we can't do anything about, I mean, we could, but I honestly think it would be good energy wasted. If you say, if I say, go challenge your university to dismantle the system, that is wasting your energy. What I say is start from yourself. How do you interact with your students? How do you interact with your junior colleagues? They will learn from you, and they will do the same with their junior colleagues, with their own, as they grow, and before you realize, the system changes. Maybe when you start doing that, and then you and your students and the people you work with are very productive, then other people in the university are saying, but why are they so productive? They can say, hey, look at how I interact with the people I work with. You know, we go out, we have lunch, we're all sitting together, and that's where all our best ideas are coming from. But at the minimum, you've affected the next generation and the following, right? And that is where you should probably focus your energy. Don't worry about trying to change the whole university. Just change yourself. Just learn for yourself and let it be visible. That part you can do. The first part of this is in terms of, we talk about journals are peer-reviewed, peer-reviewed, peer-reviewed. Somebody has to be that peer giving that review. Right? So I want to talk a little bit about how to be that peer giving that review. And then I'll talk a bit also about how you respond to that review when you get it from a journal. Right? Doing peer evaluations, it doesn't matter the field, really serve two purposes. Right? One is actually evaluating for the journal. Is this work good enough? But the second, which is very important, is providing feedback. How can it be improved upon? Right? And you do both in a review. Right? I always say the cardinal role I always think about is provide the review you would like to receive. Not in terms of, accept, right? Everybody wants, first submission, just accept. But in terms of tone and quality. In terms of tone and quality. Now, and this is, let me do an aside. We've been talking about this a little. One of the things we have to develop in academic is a thick skin. For two reasons. We look at our work as our babies, and we get overly protective. And we protect it, and sometimes that is very harmful. I mean, if you take your child and you wrap in bubble wrap because you're afraid that they may break their leg, they can't climb a tree, they can't run, that is actually very detrimental to that child. That child will not develop. It's the same with your work. So you always have to be open. Why I say this is, and that is why I talk about providing the feedback you like to receive, because sometimes most of the feedback entails you doing something, which is, sometimes directly, but sometimes indirectly, a criticism of what you have done. And people take it personally, and you have to think about how you phrase it, right? We once had a work, just last month, 2 months, I don't know if Stella heard about it. We literally had a session like this where we're providing feedback and somebody broke down and started crying. Right? You heard about it? And it threw everybody off, but it wasn't harsh, but it's just because they were not exposed to the fact that their work was going to get criticized. Right? So one preamble I should say about this is, expect that that will happen, but that is for the better. It is almost invariably going to be for the better. And so you have to take that protection out of it, but also have a thick skin to receive the criticism and apply it, right? But as difficult and as painful as reviews get when you receive them, it is always good to think about how will I, if I were giving this, have said it in such a way that my point still gets across, but make it less personal, right? So why should you do peer reviews? Now, in almost most places, nobody gets paid to do peer reviews. Even if I do 1 or if I do 50, my boss knows nothing about it. Because there's really nowhere on my form, they know if I'm on an editorial board, because I'll put that on my CV, but how many papers were sent to me, how quickly I did them, and I sent them back. Usually it's between the journals and myself. Nobody really knows. Nobody gets paid, at least in the management, in business group, we don't get paid for reviews, right? It is called service. But nobody's work is going to be published if nobody does that service, right? So the first thing to think about, why do reviews? Well, if you send your paper out to a journal and you expect peer review, so it's published in that journal, you should be willing to reciprocate. Otherwise, you're cheating. Other people are doing reviews for your work, but you're not willing to do reviews for the others. Remember, you are a peer. Don't think you don't know enough to provide feedback. If you know enough to write and submit, you know enough to provide feedback. Of course, you get better with doing reviews over time. You may say, oh, it's my first review. The editor knows you're a junior scholar. Very few editors will send all reviews to junior scholars or to students. Students do reviews too. They will usually match, you know, somebody more senior, somebody middle, somebody junior, such that the paper, the author gets a range of comments. Do your best, right? So simply saying, oh, I'm a junior faculty or I'm a PhD student, I don't know much. It's not a good excuse not to do a review. If you can write a paper to submit to a journal, then you definitely qualify. But what it does, I said earlier that really the only time I actually read full papers is in the review process. But I find now that is really the way I keep up with the literature, but know what is even coming ahead of the literature. Because the things I'm reviewing now, the things that are going to be published next year, so I don't even need to. So if I get things in my area regularly, I'm up to speed with what everybody is doing around my research area before it even gets published. Right? So you get to see what's going on. Recent research, recent theories that could be useful, recent methods that could be useful. Literally, as I was traveling here on the plane, I was doing a review for some other journal, and I had never heard of fuzzy set qualitative analysis. I never heard about it. But as I was reading it, it actually solves a problem in one other paper. And at the moment I landed, I sent a co-author that, you know, we could use fuzzy set this to solve this problem. Let's look to see. Yeah, because it does something about portfolios where you put together different resources and looks at the optimal combinations. If you put an outcome and you put the different inputs, it automatically looks at, you know, which combinations work best for the outcome. It was kind of nice. I had never heard about it before, but I learned about it reviewing another paper. And the moment I landed, I sent an email to my co-author that let's look into this. This might solve our problem with this paper, right? Those are the benefits. Equally important, it gets you into the game. Now you are part of the process. You build social capital with editors. We can criticize that, oh, maybe reviewers don't like papers from Africa. Well, now you're a reviewer. If you get a paper from Africa, you can choose to like it. Right? Now you're part of the game. You can't say, oh, reviewers don't like papers from Africa, then you refuse to do reviews. That wouldn't help. Right? So you think about it now. And I think I have this in a separate site, maybe not. Editors have very long memories, and we'll talk about this. or, all of them, which is, and it is also, and my colleagues here would agree, being an editor is also not random. It comes with other things that would be very useful to an emerging scholar, a young scholar. Contact, social capital, that you do reviews for a journal, you impress an editor, it pays off in other ways. That may not even be directly visible to you. Right? So these are the good reasons why I think these are some of the reasons why you should do reviews. But it does not mean that you have to do every review request you get. No. Right? You think, do you have the expertise? You do not need to have all the expertise. Right? So this paper I'm talking about, I did review it for the journal, but I did put a note to the editor that I am not familiar with this method. So please, take, and I did not make too much, but I said, I am really not familiar with this methodology, and I am uncomfortable with providing detailed comments regarding that. And what the editor generally would do is they would make sure they find somebody, especially if it's a new methodology, who's done it before, who's familiar with it, to also review. Right? So just, it's good. You don't need to have expertise in everything in the paper. If you know that I knew the area around the theory, so I commented and gave a lot of feedback around the theory. I had never seen the methodology. I did look it up. I read 1 or 2 papers that had used it, and I could see that yet it was probably adequately done, but I did not have the skill to pick up where they may have made errors. But I was honest with that with the editor. Say, in the letter, you always get the space where you can make a note to the editor without the author's say, right? Separate. Think about conflict of interest. It is peer review, but most journals are actually blind peer review. So, if you know the authors, the first thing you do is you tell the editor, oh, this sounds like a nice paper, but unfortunately, I know the authors. And so there might be a conflict here. Usually, it is advisable to let the editor know how. Because sometimes they may come back and say, I don't think this is a conflict of interest, or I don't think this biases, you go ahead. Right? You could be sitting in a session, in a conference, and you see most papers, as Stella talked yesterday, good papers go through conferences. If it's in my area and I'm sitting out, I may see the paper being presented. So I know who the authors are, so it may come to me. Now, if I have no other reason to be biased against the authors, I still know them. The editor may still come back and say, that's fine. I'll say, I have seen this paper presented in a conference before, and so I know who the authors are. And the editor, then leave it up to the editor to decide. But you could also have intellectual conflict of interest. Right? It could be that the paper is challenging a stream of research you're invested in. Be honest about it. Now, editors will try not to send it, but sometimes editors may not read the full paper detailedly. They read the abstract, and they look through the keywords, and then they quickly sort through to see who to send it to, so they may not realize that, you know what, this may occur. Right? For this, and I have I think I have a thicker skin because it still really, really annoys my co-author. But I had an instance where somebody decided to use a new method and use one of our papers as an example of, well, how it was not well done. And by the way, yes. Okay. And by the way, I know them, they are good friends. In fact, one of them is, now they did not tell me about that process, right? And they were like, oh, when we do panel data and strategy, we should break up within firm effects, between firm effects and within firm effects. Because you do this, and then they picked our paper. So our paper was an example of how to have done it differently, and that really annoyed. And it actually came to me. And I went back to the editor. The editor said, okay, let us go through. Now, I got taken off as a reviewer, but the editor came back and said, no, if you're publishing this, we should have a chance to rebut it. Right? But you just say no. Now, in that case, we didn't, because after I looked at it and expressed it, I realized, you know what? They were right. So then it didn't really matter. But give your conflicts of interest. Be honest with it to the editor. Let the editor make the call whether it is significant or not. Right? Do you have the... Yes, yes, we have to... No, but you can be objectively biased. Right? So put it this way. Think about you run your regression. Can you run a regression that actually has a zero error term? No, but if that error term is random, right? So if there's no bias in the error term, then, well, it's still okay, right? So no, we all have our mindsets before, right? But sorry, you were going to make a second point that I missed. Oh.
But I think the major point was on objectivity. That is possible to be objective if you are assessing something that you do not go along with. You can still say it's well done, but that's not my position.
I think as scholars, we should try as much as possible to be. Is it perfect all the time? No. But the first step about it is to recognize where your bias is. And if you think that this bias is strong, let the editor know. Yes. And which is okay. I mean, if I were an editor, I would let it go and see what the reviewer writes and see how the author responds to it. Because it is also part of the review process to convince even your strongest skeptics. Now, you also have the chance to come back. And actually, this happened to me about 10 years ago. Some editors will come back, and if a reviewer feels so strongly about something, and would give a chance for the reviewer. I have a paper that I was reviewer that I wrote to the paper, right? Journal of Management Inquiry. And they came back and said, you know, you felt so strongly about this, about resource-based view, but we decided to accept the paper anyway. Do you want to write a rebuttal to it, and would include it with it? So I did. I got my co-author and I, because it also came to something we talk about. We wrote, a full paper, kind of going, arguing against what they said. They gave the authors a chance to refute what we were saying, so it ended up being a three-way dialogue, right? But journalists like that because that's what a conversation is, right? You're having a conversation, right? But that came out of being a reviewer. Being said, no, I strongly feel, I strongly feel you cannot do this. I strongly feel this just doesn't make sense. And the author goes and says, you know what, balance. I think the editor goes, I think the authors make their point of view. Now, it doesn't occur all the time. The editor will just overrule. In this case, the editor really looked at it and said, I like your point. I like the points that were being made, and I think it will make for a really good additional dialogue. If you want to write your arguments, I'll publish it and give the authors a chance to refute, right? So it's a debate, it's a conversation, right? And so everybody is not going to be agreed on the same point. Sorry, you had a question earlier and I missed. Most that I know where you recommend it, they give you explicitly, it should not be somebody you've worked with, it should not be your advisor, someone who was in your committee. They define the relationships such that it should not be somebody who would be biased. But in general, you don't provide all. They may say, provide us a list, and they may pick one from the list, and they may pick none from the list, right? Even annoying, I think one does, Oxscience does where they have about, Oxscience has about 10 or so, 10 to 15 associate editors, and you pick your associate editor. And then you write, so you first pick the associate editor, then you recommend reviewers. Actually, I find that annoying, but What it does is it makes you go back and look who is doing research in this area and whose work is mine most closely aligned with. Right? Think about it, and this came out yesterday. Research is a conversation. Think about it as you write, like we talk about how when we were writing the introduction. Which conversation are you speaking into? You know, who just talked? Who is most likely to understand what I'm talking about? And they give you that chance. So that is actually a good chance to say, okay, to define this is the conversation I'm talking to, and this is who I want to listen. In strategy, for example, when I write, I do stuff that usually ends up going to people who use agency theory, and I really hate it. Because they come back with the same thing, oh, you don't know much about behavioral agency theory. This, no matter how much behavioral I think I know, and I put it there. So I really rewrite my introduction and make sure I cite nothing. I have nothing that will give an editor the least idea to send my paper to anybody who does agency theory. And if I get the chance, I make sure that I list. And if I get the chance, I may even say, don't send it. And sometimes you can tell the editor that when you write, you say, this work does this, and it is really against this stream of research, so I don't think people doing this stream of research would be objective reviewers. And at that point, it's up to the editor whether or not how much of that they take into consideration, but you can point it out. Yes, Joe. Letter, yes. Yes, especially if you think that there is somebody or some stream of research that will be biased. You put that in the letter of the editor. Say, I would not like somebody doing research in this area who uses this theory, or you can literally put names, especially if your research directly contradicts the research of somebody that you think there's no way they can be objective. You can directly put names. Because this paper contradicts this, I don't think there would be an objective evaluator. Of course, you can also just knock them out by sending them the paper before you submit it, that please provide me comments in it, and they know who you are, so they have to take themselves out. And by the way, think about the people you reference in your introduction, your first 2 pages. Those better be the people. That is the conversation you're speaking to. That is one good place to start. And if you're not being able to pick any one of those people, maybe you should rethink your introduction of who exactly are you speaking to and which conversation are you joining. Right. Any other questions? Oh, and the time, right? Please, 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 please. This is, as an editor, this is so, if you send something out to somebody and they agree to review it and they do not do it in time, right? I know if people keep asking me, well, how long does it take in your journal, in the African Journal of Management, to hear back? I say usually I hope for, 2 months, 3 months. But, and one of the big buts is if I send it out to review, and we give 45 days. 45 days pass, I don't hear anything. I send you, usually I'll wait a week till you're a week late before I send, there's a reminder, then I really send a follow-up direct. And some people may come back and say, oh, I'll work on it, or I'm traveling, give me a couple more weeks, which is okay. Sometimes you have to be about 2 weeks late to 3 weeks late before I reassign to somebody. And if I reassign, then I have to give them this. Now, the author on the other side doesn't see all of this. They are saying, oh, my paper is just sitting there. Right? And that is why it is very important to say no if you cannot do it in time. Because somebody's career may be hanging on it. That decision may come in time for somebody to get a promotion or not. And it is always important to be timely. Right? can you miss it in a week, within a week? I mean, for me, I don't know about the other editor. Yeah, if you're late a week, I think we can live with that because things happen. If you're going to keep it a month extra, then you could tell, and this happens, you tell the editor, I would like to review this, but I am really tied up the next 30 days or 45 days. If I do it, I would have to do it within 60 days. And then the editor would decide. They'll say, okay, that's fine, and they would extend the timeline for you to turn it back in, or they'll say, that's okay, we'll assign it to somebody else. Right? But you have to think about that. Do's and don'ts, and I suppose I can start with the last thing, right? Don't say yes and keep it indefinitely. The editor will be really upset with you. The authors will be upset with the editor. They'll be getting emails, what is going on with my paper? And the editor may at some point remember. Oops. That's okay. It's okay to say no. Once again, I said doing reviews is good, but if you have a good reason not to do it, the time doesn't work, you're working on your proposal, things are really tight, the past 30, the next 30 days ago, you say, listen, you can say, listen, my proposal defense is due in 30 days or in 45 days, and I really have no time. I had one 2 months ago, I actually know that I sent, and they sent me back a message saying, Herman, I'm literally in the hospital about to give birth right now. I cannot do this. And I said, oh, congratulations. And of course, we all understand you can't. Well, of course, I'm happy, right, that they are giving birth. So I'm not, of course, they can't do the review. But there are many good reasons why you cannot do a review. Just send the editor an email back and saying, I can't for this. Some editors would ask to say, if you can't do it, could you please recommend somebody else, maybe another co-author. This is where, what this also does, it's not that the editor is lazy. The editor can look up, even from the paper itself, the references in the paper to find people. This is where it gives you the chance to get some of your junior colleagues into the system. So maybe you have a doctoral student you're working with that is also doing research in this very particular area. You could recommend them to the editor if you know that they will at least do a decent job, or another junior colleague. You help get them into the system. Because then once you do one review, you're in the database, and if you did a good job, the editor remembers, they note it, and something comes from along that area, you may also get another review. Right? It is really good to build social capital with editors. Because as annoying as it is, they are the gatekeepers to the field, right? So there is an egoistic reason, right? You're reviewing for journals that you're also going to submit papers to. Now, editors try to be unbiased. But you know what? If somebody's been doing good reviews for me and they have a paper in front of me where one reviewer says reject, another reviewer says accept, and I'm dancing between rejecting and giving a revision, what am I likely to do? I'll likely give them a chance to fix the paper. If they have been reviewing in the journal and I have to make a judgment call, I will give them the benefit of that and ask them to do a revision versus an outright rejection. And it is in this, and these little margins play out, because if you think Africa Journal Management, our direct submissions, we are dancing around 9% acceptance rate. Well, that was last year. This year will probably drop to 6 or so. Over half of the papers are desk rejects, right? Then another quarter gets rejected upon reviewer comments. So if you get the chance to get a revision, and I think I actually have a slide somewhere, maybe not. If you get the chance for a revision, just because of the Goodwill, it drops your, think about how it raises your odds. You go from, 1 in 100 or 5 in 100 to 5 in 25. Because 75% of the papers are not going to get an invitation to revise. So you have a foot in the door. That at least gives you a foot in the door to see what reviewers are saying and fix it, right? And this is where the goodwill matters. But it's a broad field. The goodwill comes in lots of other ways. Those might be the same people who may have to write a letter for you for your promotion. Right? I don't know if that happens here in Africa. For them, when we go up for promotion, it's tenure, another major, they ask for external letters for people, notable people in the field. And most people who would be notable in the field would probably be editors. Right? If they remember you doing reviews for them, they are more likely, one, to say yes and write a strong, favorable letter. Someday you might be applying to the institution. They will know you, they will remember you as a good colleague. If they had been asking you for reviews and you were accepting and not doing it, or doing it poorly, or simply not responding to emails, and they're sitting one day and they're hiring and your CV comes along, they're already going to say, this is a very bad colleague, why should we even bother? Now, you would never know this happens because you never get a call back. You never knew that you didn't get a call back because this is not the best of colleagues. So, well, I always have a letter that goes in, right? So sometimes I may de-emphasize what a reviewer says. Now, do I say, I have never said don't do that for a reviewer comment. But what I will do is I would highlight the things I think are important, which means if I don't highlight something, it gives you also a clue that maybe I don't see it as important as I do, right? And we will talk about it on the other side. So the two answers to that is, one, as a reviewer, try not to be that person, right? Let us say, as a reviewer, I try not to be. That's why I say, do the review you like to review, to receive, right? Then we will. I have to move quickly now. Yeah, we will talk on the other end how you respond to ones like that. Familiarize yourself with the norms and standards of the journal, so you calibrate your expectations, and of course remember the deadlines, bad manners, especially with deadlines. And by the way, you also do that. Somebody who does that will not get an invitation to review again, right? And getting no invitations to review is much worse than getting too many. Especially if you have been given once and they never come back to you, that is a sign it left a negative notation. How you do. But it's not suicide, it just means you have to improve as a colleague in your tone, maybe in your responsiveness, and as such. So you had a question. That is, I would say, it is supposed to be a blind review. So first, that is unethical. If somehow or another somehow or another you know who the authors are. Now, benign knowledge is okay. So sometimes I'm reviewing a paper and I do a literature search because I want to see what has been done. I can figure out who the author is if they are using the same data set, for example. Also those. But those I'll consider benign. Right? It's not a big deal. It doesn't bias me one way or another. Now, I figure out who they are by just simply seeing the name. Sometimes, and this has actually happened, I'm reviewing a paper and a job candidate comes in and they present that same paper. To me, those are slightly benign, meaning I don't go tell them, oh, I'm the reviewer of this paper. I keep quiet about it, obviously. If I think it biases me or if something happened in that interaction, then I'll let the editor know. Right? When in doubt, let the editor know. But it is unethical if somehow or another for you to have any interaction, especially regarding, if you figure out who they are, any interaction. And by the way, we actually had this discussion at the Academy of Management, something else, because it is happening more and more. The blind process is perpetual. The fact that you reviewed a paper that eventually ended up being accepted, you will know who the authors are because you see the paper in the journal. Doesn't mean you go up to the authors and say, hi, I was reviewer number 1. I consider that unethical. Because now you're somehow expecting them to be beholden to you because their paper was accepted. Right? So, no. No, sir. So is it to the author or to the, so I actually did an Elsevier review. I didn't know that Elsevier had that for, I think it's Journal of Business Venturing. I had never really done a review for them before. And I noticed that it actually came up. This was last week that if this, no, but it said if this paper is rejected and we are sending it to another sister journal, another journal run by Elsevier, would you want us to release your names to the journal? Not to the journal? Well, okay, that one I saw it said to the journal. Then it is no longer a blind review, so they cannot say this is a blind review. I mean, that is what I'll say. I've never... There are times when, just one second, there are times when and in fact, I think I actually have an example there when that may have been the case. There have been a time when I've been frustrated with a reviewer because I was joking, I've had a paper go 7 rounds, and I've been frustrated with the reviewer after 2-3 rounds, and I made a phone call to the editor and followed up, talked with the editor saying, listen, this guy is asking this, we're doing it every possible way. Let him just say what he wants. He keeps saying, you know, you haven't controlled for endogeneity appropriately and whatever, but you passed the request through. And what the editor now did was the editor actually asked, we talked and he said, okay, why don't you formulate a very specific question? We formulated a very specific question, sent it to the editor sent it back to the reviewer provided some guidance as to what they were thinking or expecting, and then the editor sent it back to us. Right? So we can communicate that way. I have never seen that part, but what I'll say is, if a journal is doing it, then they cannot say it is blind review. And that's okay. There are many journals that are not blind review, they're peer review, but not blind. No, but this is still part of the process, right? Because if they're asking for clarification, it means they're doing a revision or something. Yes, sir. Yeah, but that I don't know. That is not part of there. That is not the blind part. Yes, so that would be difficult. Yes, that is different. Now, how do you do a review? Which is what we're even going to talk about. I've talked about everything else but that. There are many ways of doing it, right? I'll give you how I do it, and I think some people I know doing it. There are variants of this, so I'm not saying this is the only way or the best way. What I generally do is I do a first read-through. That first read-through, I just look for big questions. What's the research question? Is it original, relevant, and interesting? At least the research question, I make notes. Does it, you know, you'll be surprised how many, sometimes us researchers were like kids in a candy store, we just get off track. We see the next new candy and we forget what we're doing and we chase it. So does the paper even do what it sets out to do? Sometimes you see what the paper says in the introduction. By the time you get to the methods, there's no connection, right? Does it actually do what it sets out to do? Or you look at the contributions of the paper and they are so lofty, and you look at what they did, there's still, once again, a disconnect, right? Are the conclusions consistent with the results? Is the structure style consistent with the journal? Are there any gaps or major fatal flaws, right? So I quickly look at fatal flaws. What will I consider to be fatal flaws? So these are, when I see, is fatal flaw is something that would make me recommend, irrespective of what else is in the paper, a rejection. What would constitute a fatal flaw? If there's no clear research issue or contribution, right? Once again, while there are differences, I know we talked about it, Stella talked about it yesterday. In most, at least, of the journals of the North, and at least Africa Journal of Management, we expect you to explicitly state what you're contributing. You don't want to let the reader infer it, right? The norms for this may differ by field, but that's why I'm saying. Is the method used appropriate? Is the data sufficient to actually draw the conclusions made, right? Or maybe there's questionable data or method, right? Usually if you have questions regarding though that's significant, it's usually a fatal flaw. Are there logical flaws, logical incongruities that are significant enough to simply hamper the whole paper? Right? And of course, lack of conformity to the norms of the field or the journal. Now here I'm not talking about minor formatting. But sometimes I look at papers that it is clear that the person has not even bothered to look at one paper from this journal. So I'll give you one example. I noticed within, as you write your dissertations, and it is common, especially in Southern Africa, they like putting objectives separately. They'll talk then at the end, maybe a bit of discussion of the literature after one page, put research questions, state it, objectives actually stated. But if you look at most of Africa Journal of Management, most of the other North journals, they don't do that. That is blended in continuous prose with the writing. Right? Something like that already gives me an indication this person probably never bothered looking through the journal. Right? So major structural things, if I see those, then those are the things that we'll consider to be fatal flaws. And fatal flaws generally means you already know you're going to reject. Second read-through is when I write the review. Yes. Yeah, it's a subjective call. What combinations? What I look at is, one, is this something that can be redone in a reasonable time? And two, if it is redone, is it the same paper? So if you have to go collect totally brand new data in a new sample, that is probably going to be a different paper in any case, right? But that is generally purely subjective. So there is no cutoff criteria. It's a judgment call. So second read-through is usually when I write, right? So usually after the first read-through, I'll write down the major points if there are any. You know, usually by pen or circle. Then second read-through, I generally would write. I try to always start off positive. This is what the paper sets out to do. This is where it could potentially contribute and what is nice. At least even one sentence of what might be positive with the paper. Sometimes it may be hard. Some papers it might be difficult, right? But you just try to, because you know, I keep thinking about the person reading it, right? You want, they put a lot of work into this. You want them to at least feel good, because the rest of what you're going to say is going to be negative, somewhat, right? As much as possible, as you pick, whether it's invalid arguments, factual errors, ambiguous statements, these are the smaller minor things, and these are the sort of things that would definitely get you more of a revision. Things on the previous slide will likely get you a rejection, right? So I pick all of these points and at least I try to group similar points together so it's easy for the authors and try to be consistent, right? So if it's a journal that is not too strong on what your theoretical contribution is, I don't get too tied down over the theory, right? Always, as much as possible, this is not always possible, offer suggestions as to how it can be remedied, because this is where it is meant to provide feedback. Offer suggestions to the authors as to what they can do, right? But certain overall, and I'm definitely might dig into the writing time. Okay. It is not your paper. Don't take somebody's paper, you're supposed to be a reviewer, and you want to make them write the paper you were thinking about writing or you would have liked to write. It is their paper, right? You're trying to help them improve their paper, not write a paper for you. Be constructive, be accurate. Don't give a review with factual errors saying, oh, you cannot use this technique for doing this when somebody can, right? One, it causes a lot of headache for the person on the other side because now they spend a lot of time verifying and maybe they're trying doing something else which may actually make it wrong. But you also lose credibility in the eyes of the editor when they notice that. When you raise an issue, try to be as specific as possible and try to provide examples, right? Do not, and I think I was talking about this with the people, do not state or discuss your recommendation to the editor in your review. And by the way, if you're looking at reviews, don't look at it and say, oh, this review is so positive, this person must have recommended accept. You'll be surprised how many people write very positive reviews, and when it comes to evaluation, they say reject. Someone is like, oh, this editor really doesn't like me, now it's personal. From the reviewers, he should have accepted this paper, because you don't know what they have written privately to the editor. You have to be concise and realistic. What you're asking the authors to do, is it really doable? And don't ask them to lift the mountain for just a minimal benefit, right? But be also open to be convinced for them to come back to you and say, this does not make sense for this reason. So be open-minded, right? You're reviewing the manuscript, the paper, not the author. So try to speak about the manuscript, not the author, right? And there are some examples of how I will go through, but I had at least one here. You can say, the authors appear to have no idea what they are talking about. I don't think they have read any of the literature on this topic. Right? That's one way of saying it. And that will make, everybody here will feel bad if they read that. Or you can say, this study fails to address how the findings relate to previous research in this area. Rewriting the introduction to include related literature, especially recently published papers such as, me and you, would greatly enhance. But this is that I will tell them that they really didn't do a good job with their literature review. But you make it about the manuscript, not about the authors. And notice there is a suggestion of what to do. You even, quick literature search, you could even provide them with a more recent starting point, a more recent paper, if they have not yet. And I really have to pick up my pace. I thought we'd have time to actually look through some, but we wouldn't. How do you respond? And I'm going to speak a lot faster now. I should put, sorry. How do you respond when you get reviewer comment? Oh, yes. Yes, yes. So, yes, right, and that is from the author side versus from the reviewer side. So, yes, so as an author side, what I would say is, think about the fact that a lot of what we do is taken on credibility, on faith. And so, if you give signals that you're sloppy, if you give signals that you're not dotting your I's and crossing your T's in some of the basic things, then I can imply that you've not done that for lots of the other things that went on in the paper I cannot see, right? So once you start signaling sloppiness, your references are off. They're wrong. You have the wrong reference. You are signaling sloppiness, and that inference can be applied to maybe how you did your methods. You know, we don't get to see your raw regression printouts, for example. We trust the fact that you accurately transcribe that to a table. If you're sloppy, then maybe the results we're looking at on the table are not the actual results. We have to trust that you did that correctly. So if I see signs of sloppiness in other parts in the paper, I infer to the rest, and I become, you know, my antennas prick up, and I start looking for every little thing, and I'm not giving you the benefit of doubt, right? So yes, you're definitely correct about that. That it is a big. Oh yes. Well, I think that goes without saying, right? I don't know if Tristan was thinking about doing anything about plagiarism or. By the way, no, you can plagiarize yourself. So the fact that you publish your paper, it doesn't mean you can copy the same paragraph and paste in a different. So, so you say, I wrote it, so I can just take my method section and reuse. So this, no. Now, do this. There is what? Everybody here familiar with turnitin.com? That is a popular one. Self-check. Just start off by self-checking. Because, yes, so, I mean, there are times I put placeholders that I may forget that, yes, you know, method, okay, I'm using the same method, I put it there knowing that I'll rewrite that paragraph, and you may forget. So just make it a practice of self-checking. Before you submit, you run it yourself. Yeah, hopefully nobody here is engaged with that. That is well. I mean, there are always going to be ways to cheat that beat the system, but that's not what, yes. And I'm already out of time. Can I just go a little over and wrap this go? So let me rush quickly and think about how you respond to reviewer feedback, right? Most reviewers, I'm not going to say all, but most reviewers provide you feedback to help improve the paper. You have to be open-minded, and you have to take it as such. Does it feel like criticizing your work? Yes. Is it painful? Yes. Do we react to it negatively? Yes. I can't remember how many reviewer things I've got, but my personal view is, my personal way I deal with it is, when I get a decision, I read the decision, I don't read the reviews. I let it sit for a week. That desensitizes me from the review. So I'm not being defensive as I'm reading I already know the decision, whether it's a rejection or a revise and resubmit. Now, when I am reading the reviewer comments, I'm not as defensive. Because I find if I get defensive, then I'm thinking about ways that the reviewer is wrong versus ways in which I can incorporate the comments to help me fix the paper, right? Always expect you will make significant changes to a paper from when you do the first draft to when you submit, and from when you submit to when it gets published. Otherwise, there's been no improvement or learning in the process. Right? Look at it as learning. Right? So plan on that. Never let a revise and resubmit go to waste. Please. I mean, accept the blame, right? Because even if the reviewer's point was not accurate, you have to think about it as your fault for not being clear enough such that they don't see a point, right? But it's just the general frame of mind to think, you know what, something is wrong here. Thank you for pointing it out to my attention. Try to use, how you format it, and I'll show an example, the formatting to help it make it easy for the reviewers to navigate. Directly answer the point being raised, then you can provide substantive details. Usually refer them back to the revised manuscript where that is when possible. As much as possible, do what the reviewer asks you. If you cannot, provide a good rationale why it cannot be done, right? Always provide a clear indication what has changed across the manuscripts. And these are generally not trivial, because most, and I'll quickly show some examples there. I get this African Journal Manual where reviewers send comments, and I get, have a page response, and somebody just puts done. Done, and I look through the paper, and 1 or 2 sentences and words have been changed, right? That is a rejection. Earlier on, I made the mistake of sending those out without looking clearly, and a few people really got upset. I had one reviewer say, well, why are we wasting our time if they do nothing? And I looked at it, and I really felt bad. And so now I actually read. And if I look that you have not made the effort to tackle the reviewer comments, I just reject it. I don't send it back to the reviewer. Right? And I think many editors would probably do the same. Let me see if I can borrow a minute and 2. So some of what I picked, so I'll give you sample reviewer. Okay, how do I switch to Word versus? So how do I get that screen versus the PowerPoint? No, go ahead, you go ahead. It's not displaying. Maybe if we close, maybe we just close PowerPoint, it will switch to that. Yes, let's start with that. Actually, do the other one. Since we're out of time, I'm just going to skip to the response document. Yes, so let's do this one, dear editor. Yes, do that one. So let's project that one. Can't we just get it project the screen? Yeah, okay, there it is. Oh, you see what you're doing? Can I give you a suggestion? Yes, duplicate the screen versus extend the screen. Okay, I did not notice that you had to extend the screen. So this is an example of, a response letter, right? First, yes, and you can scroll, you can let it stand there for a second. You thank the editor, you praise them for all the great reviews and all that, and how much, their reviews have made the paper so much better. Then you provide a summary of the things that were done. So this is an empirical paper, but this journal also wants strong theory. So separated out the response. So, theoretically, we did that. Let's just keep scrolling. You can keep going. Then we did the things we did empirically, right? So this is generally summarizing what you've done for the editor to have a good idea. Now, usually if the editor sees this, they will not detailedly go through, because by the time, look at this. This is the response document. It is 35 pages, right? Now, part of the reason it is 35 pages is now, and if it makes you feel any better, this paper ended up still being rejected after 5 rounds, right? But that is what that is the nature of the game, right? Notice we come now to the editor made their own comments, which is their own summary of the reviewers, what they think we should highlight. And let's scroll down, we have to go quickly. You respond to the editor's comments. I want to go back to the reviewer's comments. So, because the editors kind of pick key points from the reviewers. So we see the review itself. Let's go down to okay. So so this is review one. For guide, I usually copy and paste the reviews. So the reviews are in italics. Each point that is made, I put the response to that point, right? So hopefully you know the first, and so you can see how they did their review. They start with a summary and something nice. And we say thank you, right? Now they go to the criticism, right? And these guys were tough, right? They're like, well, yes, the arguments were clear and logically constructed, but, right? And these were some logical inconsistencies, right? Your first hypothesis, you made this argument, and we don't have to read this, but I can provide this if you want. Scroll down. We provide a response. You can see how big, long the response is as to how we tackled it. You go to their point B, you provide a response. Sometimes it may be necessary. In this case, that one, it necessarily entailed running additional analysis. This analysis, we decided not to include with the text, right? That is why, so you have a different table. R3 will be results table just for the reviewers. That is not included in the manuscript. Just to show that, well, you know, the reviewer wanted us to do one way. We say, yeah, this way still works, but we don't think it's valid for this reason or that reason. But here are the results. You can see them, right? And we can go all the way down. This is just to show, and I can make this available. Unfortunately, I can make this now. This one is one of mine. I did not do one of because I don't think it's ethical for me to take an author's response. So I did not do one of the journals. So I can share this with you because it could have been one of your papers, and I mistakenly put the review up there. That may not be good. I've gone a little over my time, well, a lot over my time, 10 minutes over my time. But any additional questions? Yes.
Thank you, Prof, for that presentation. But maybe I missed this one. Based on your past experiences, how do you identify the reviewers? Do you create opportunities for self-development?
Yes, so last time in AFAM, actually, a few people wanted to, and I took their cards and what they were interested in, and I think I generally have used most of it. This is our issue. So when I started, there was already an editorial board and a reviewer list, huge, that had been populated. But I would probably go through 6 people before I get one response. And that is so annoying because you send it, and that delays the process. You give them time. People are traveling. And so what I have started doing now is the people who have responded in the past that I know, I mark, I use. But when I take your paper and I start reading it, I look at who you reference. And I go look them up. And as I go through the paper, if it's close enough, and I think, I send them emails. I say, would you please, we have this paper, would you like to please review it for us? If I look for somebody who has also published in the journal on that topic, I send them, I send to them, right? Then I may look now within there for somebody who's not reviewed or doesn't have an experience. That's why we use a younger. So I always try to have a mix of somebody who's published in that area and maybe somebody, a younger person who may not have done much reviews before, and that is where now you build experience. By the way, something you should do, and I always do it, if I'm a reviewer on a paper and the editor comes back with a decision, not only do I read the decision, I read the other reviews. Because I'm curious, did I miss something important? A signal also, and sometimes I get hurt by the way, I look at how much of my own review the editor puts in their letter. Yeah. That is an indication for me of how good a review I did. Now, if the editor goes through the letter and they cite reviewer 2 and they cite a lot of reviewer 1 mentioned this and reviewer 3, and they don't cite reviewer 2, that tells me the editor did not think I did a good job. And I'm a little hurt which is okay because that motivates me next time to say, you know what, I have to step my game up. I did not do a good review. Right? So that is also how I get feedback as to how I did in a review. But I see what the other reviewers picked up that I missed. Yes. Oh, sorry. One of you. Okay, ladies first. Yes, it is possible to miss. That sometimes happens. Just refer them. Then what I would do is I would change something about it because they missed it reading it, so it is not appropriately placed. We have our tendencies, and this is where knowing the norms of the journal matters. We know where certain things are supposed to be. So if I'm going through the method place and you discuss your sample and I don't see anything about sample size, if you had mentioned it in the introduction, I may not even remember. And I'm like, where's your sample size? I have no idea what your sample size is. It means it's probably also in the wrong place, right? But reviewers are human. They miss things and just say, sorry, we missed. And the way I do not to make a reviewer necessarily feel like you're telling them they are wrong is I just adjust it slightly. I say it means it wasn't salient before, so now we've tried to make the point more salient and we've expanded on it or put it in a prior paragraph or something. Now, if they raise some, and forget all about reviewers, even with co-authors. I learned this from one of my professors I work with. When I work with co-authors, if they change something, even if I don't like it, I never take it back to what it was before. I may change it to something else. And it's the same with reviewer. If a reviewer points something about a section, change it. Change, so even if they were wrong something, adjust something. Because once again, there may have been a reason why they missed something that is obvious. Yeah, you go through, but I had the sentence here. Just change it a little, right? If you get a rejection, many rejections still come with reviewer comments. I almost forget to mention. Address those comments before you send it out to a new journal. One, you just wasted a lot of people's time. You missed an opportunity. We talk about peer feedback, you know. For me, when I work on a paper, I'm very happy if people can read it and give me feedback to improve it. In this case, you got feedback, you know, quote unquote, for free, and you don't use it. Right? So one, you lost an opportunity to improve on the paper. The reviewers picked on issues. If you don't fix them, the next set of reviewers would also pick on those same issues. But guess what? It's also a very small field. And I've done that. It has occurred to me. Reviewers use the same criteria to look. Editors use the same criteria to look for reviewers. So you send it to Journal A in the field. They send it to reviewers and reject it. You send it to Journal B in the same field. The editor uses the same criteria. What are the odds it ends up with the same reviewers? At that point, what do? Most people I would do is send a note back to the editor and say, I have seen this paper before. These are the reviews I provided them. They have not made any substantive difference or used this feedback. And almost all editors will just reject your paper. You've not shown any signs that you're part of the conversation. You missed an opportunity. So think about it. Mm-hmm. Yes. Use what papers? Dummy papers? What are dummy papers?
Like just a test, just to try the reviewer.
No. No.
Because the time, some of the papers you really feel that they are not the kind of thing. That's what you are
Yeah, look, there are type 1 and type 2 errors, right? And yes, do we sometimes err sending out papers that maybe should not have? And that is where the editor uses his judgment call and say, you know what, this paper has some glaring errors, but I think that it could be fixed and maybe reviewer comments could improve. Or the editor may have missed it, right? Because, okay, I have to make a decision sometimes to whether to send a paper out or reject. And that first reading, I'm not reading as a reviewer. I'm reading just to make a revision decision. And if the error is not glaring and I miss it, I'll send it out, which is okay. So if you see at that point, you point it. I don't think any editor, I don't know, I mean, have you guys ever heard of somebody sending? What would happen is, I send to 2, 3 reviewers. One, or at least 2 of them would be very experienced in the field. So it is okay if one review comes back that is not solid. Are there times that I've had 2 reviews that are not solid? Yes. What do? That means I actually do a review. So I sit down and part of the my editor letter actually goes, 4, 5 pages because I end up acting like a reviewer. Am I too happy with that? No. But once again, if there are junior scholars and I realize it's the first time they're doing reviews, I don't hold it, You hope that it improves. And what you do, and this is well learning, once you see, when I send out a decision, most journals do, but we definitely do with the Africa Journal of Management, you get to see my letter to the reviewer, to the authors, and the comments from the other reviewers. You get to see that at the same time. You use that to benchmark your own reviews such that it improves next time. But I don't think anybody will waste anybody's time with dummy reviews. But if you want practice, let me tell you just a second. Let me tell you where you practice reviews. Remember we talked about peers? Look at the person sitting next to you. Do they have a paper that needs friendly review? Do friendly reviews for each other. Right? That is right, right from the time we're going to do friendly reviews for each other, your skills start building up. Right? I've totally blown your time schedule. Okay.
Someone told me if you want to publish with Journal A, right, you need to get more articles from that journal. That is the paper a little bit of statement for them to know that you actually acknowledge the existence of that journal. How to do with that? And second, what is the issue with convenient handling? Is it a long dead zone or is it something that we should be looking at?
The first question is easy. It's easier to answer, right? Well, I'll let them answer the second question. It's harder. Yes and no, right? Writing is a conversation. If you're sending your journal, your paper to a journal where no article in that journal is cited, then which conversation are you really participating in? Was that conversation also taking place in that journal? Right? Now, are there some journals that may try to game the system for citations? Now, I think many indices maybe take away self-cite to get you cite as much of their papers. Yes, right? That doesn't make sense, but there should be some. 0. Now, let me put, in our case, because we're relatively young, I usually don't look, because some topics you may be sending something that we actually have not published anything there before. So that is, for Africa Journal of Management, that is not an issue. But for some of the older journals, it may be an issue. They're like, okay, you're writing to us, we're looking through, because think about it, it's not that they're looking to see whether you're citing them, they're looking for reviewers. Right? When I start looking through the introduction or whatever, I'm looking at people and seeing what they're doing. I'm looking at who are the reviewers I'm going to send. And if I find you citing somebody in that area who's published in this journal, so they know the standards, then I know I'll get good reviews. That is who I'll grab. So that is where that comes into play. The issue about sampling, and we have a problem with this, I would say, is it needs a whole workshop like this. We are blessed by the fact that a lot of people are still willing to answer surveys in Africa. I think we were cursed by the fact that we go about it usually all wrong. One of the worst things that I feel bad doing and I still have not yet figured out a nice way to say it, is when I'm telling somebody or I'm writing about a review, your data is unusable. You went out there and you collected all this survey, but you really didn't plan ahead. There are these issues with it. And that is really a rejection because you have to start afresh. You know, you can't, especially with survey, it's not archival. You can't salvage. You have to go back and start afresh. And this is where we should take, you know, the methods very seriously. Surveys seem simple, but they're actually very tricky. You know, you think about all the biases that can go into surveys that you have to tackle beforehand. And you don't get a second go at least not with the same sample, right? So that is something that is really, it is not a 1 or 5 minute answer, it's workshop material. So can you use convenience sampling? Yes. Do you have to do a lot of work around it to make it usable? Yes. So the important question is, how do you get to use it? Any other questions? Yes.
Just to comment that at times you find editors also being sloppy. They send you a reviewed manuscript. When you look at the review, you can actually put the name to Goodwill. You can find the person. And at times you find that the person is not even in the field.
Yes, yes, sometimes that happens. What I would say is this, remember, editors, some editors, and I don't know about your experience, please chime in. The first read of the article is to even see if it's appropriate and if it's sufficiently developed to send out to blind review. Because you don't want to be desk rejecting too much based on content, because now you're circumventing the blind review process. I want 2 or 3 peers to be the one to say this is bad, not me. So when I'm reading, unless it is really blatant, I don't want to evaluate simply based on content. I just want to make sure it is sufficiently developed. So it might be somewhere inside the text, somebody embeds their name or some information that reveals their identity. It may be difficult for the editor to catch immediately, right? But that is something where you just draw the attention of the editor that, look, this is no longer blind because right here this person has revealed their identity.
If you send a document, some software identifies the author.
So that is their submission system level. Most, you know, if you submit in PDF, ours would know that it redoes the PDF and takes out all author information, such that when you download it, we look at properties, is the journal properties that show, right? So that is probably, yes, they don't have as good a developed. What I was thinking more like you know, to methods, and somebody will say, oh, in our previous research, then they cite it. If we do, then that just, at that point, and that is easy to miss.
I'm looking at the response to the data that you gave and the sense of the, how willing are the editors to take their time in their presentation?
They do. And that is why the reviewers get quite annoyed and editors get quite annoyed when all that is provided and you don't take it seriously, for one. Because they do, because by the time you append this to the actual paper, you're looking now at 70, 80 pages. So when reviewers ask you to do stuff, it also means it's more work for the reviewers, right? But at the end, if the paper comes out and it's a great paper, everybody is happy.
But you know, but what that does for you, if you don't do that summary, and then I have to read the paper and try to figure out where you made the changes, I'm more annoyed. You see, and not every reviewer has the same concern.
Yes.
Shouldn't do that, but I'm more likely to look at that and see that they address my comment. You know, so I'm just saying it's a roadmap for the reviewer. You can also put that in the table.
Yes, I actually have, there's another example here that's table form. Yes, and I can show. And do we share documents? Is there a way we can share documents?
I think we will send round.
Yes, we'll do a Dropbox. So this, I can make this available. It's mine. So I've already taken out. Yes, I've already taken out the editor's name. So Any last question? I'm told we're taking the last question, so.
Okay, so in relation to that, does it help to sort of highlight explicitly in the revised article where you've made substantial changes?
No, you don't. Oh, no, it's on. No, you don't highlight. What you can do is you can quote in here. So I'm sorry, I can say, they say your description of the data was not clear, and I redo it. I can come and say, okay, thank you for drawing that to attention. We've now provided greater clarity on how we gathered the data. On page 30, second paragraph, we now say, and I quote the whole paragraph. And they reveal that because, it minimizes the time they spend with the text. They can look through that, they see that they're not going to search. So rather than highlighting in the document, quote it in the response document.
That depends from journal to journal.
Okay, yes.
Some are track changes and then the summary document.
Oh, okay. Okay, so where are we going to this? Is it lunch? So lunch time. Thank you everybody.
It was a very good presentation. Okay, before you break for lunch, when it's prosper, there is the following is you have our lunch, you can try to see him to regularize certain things. Sibanda from NAST, is he around? Sibanda from NAST? Not yet. Wisdom? Mumzenzi, you are from Bendura? Yes, there you are. Shower SMSU? No. Rulinda Elias GZU? I thought I saw you. There you are. Makoni Richard, he's around. I'll let him so that he can meet with Helen, Wengana, my dear Olivia, you are one of them, Chabawa, Gumbo Clever. So as we have our lunch, I'm pleading with you that we try to be quick over our lunch, so that we may come slightly earlier than the 2 o'clock we are meant to come. We still have to cover other things. And you remember, when we completed the end, we will have 30-minute tour. So for our lunch, we go to where we had our breakfast, our tea. Thank you. I forgot to alert you again that, you remember, the live streaming continues. Those who may want to go on Facebook or YouTube, you search for Technomag, then you will be able to see what has been happening. Thank you. Sure, yes, we'll make sure that it's secured.